Natasha, welcome. I'm
Hi.
just so excited to interview you today to talk about your experience after the boot camp. But first, I want to ask you what you were doing when you were in the boot camp for work.
During the boot camp, I was bartending, but previously to the boot camp, I was a hairstylist and did not have any prior coding experience. The only thing I knew about anything was like basic HTML and CSS from high school, and like mostly from customizing my own MySpace page. Um,
How did you
yeah,
customize your MySpace page? Was that CSS or?
it was all like HTML and inline CSS pretty much
Oh,
to
wow.
create like a template. Yeah. You could you could get templates and then you could edit them yourself if you kind of knew what you were doing. But I had no idea what I was doing, just kind of winging it, but it was pretty
Mhm.
fun.
I didn't learn HTML in school. I didn't even know what it was.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I took like a web design class in high school, but it was very basic, like old school websites. So,
Hmm. I did a HTML and CSS course before the boot camp, and so that was like my intro to it, but did not know it before. Okay, so you went to the boot camp and you had the same experience that I did, which,
yeah.
side note, mini plug to my many subscribers. I have a video on that. And basically, Natasha and I have had the same experience in the boot camp. But okay, so after the boot camp, what was your strategy for landing your first job?
I did start applying to jobs when I graduated, but I didn't, or I guess I completed the course or whatever, but I didn't like stop studying. So that was like really important. And I was also applying for volunteer opportunities. So not only jobs, but like anything to be actively coding while to get something on my resume.
Like internships for coding?
Internships. Yeah, I was applying to internships, but also like on volunteermatch.com, there's like you could search for all different types of volunteer stuff, like PR stuff, marketing things. Like, so I actually did end up finding a volunteer opportunity like 2 months after my boot camp. Um, that I was there probably 3 or 4 months helping out.
Doing
So
what? I didn't know.
it was during COVID. It was like right when the boot camp ended, and so it was these like mechanical engineers were making this ventilator, and so I was helping with a couple other engineers who to do like an interface for it,
Oh, I
like
didn't
a
know
lot of
that.
sliders and like graphs and stuff. Yeah, it
Huh.
was kind of fun.
So you put that on your resume then, and that probably
Yeah,
looked good. Did you
yeah.
put like what was your job title then? Did you put intern?
I just said like web developer volunteer or something. I put it under volunteer stuff. So
Mm, that's cool. Okay, so my next question is that when you were in the boot camp, were there qualities in some of the students that you saw that they were successful after the boot camp?
um I think people that generally like showed up early for like the tutoring beforehand,
Mhm.
and you can kind of tell who is more dedicated in general than people who are kind of not taking it as seriously. Or also sometimes I think it's overwhelming. It's a lot of tough concepts. So I think people kind of check out when they're not understanding. So if people that are checking out aren't going home to study it or rewatch the class afterwards, it's going to be really difficult to stay up to pace because every day is like introducing a new concept and it just moves really fast. So I think people that generally showed up early and were clearly studying and working on projects late into the night were people that are the most successful.
Yeah, I think you can tell when people are like that. But I probably gave off both of those vibes because I would go to class early and I would talk to the tutor, and then I would sit in class and be like, I don't know what's happening, and I wouldn't even listen. I would start like drawing off the side or playing on my phone, and then we'd break and go to get coffee, and I'd come back late. So I don't know how I ended up being successful because I didn't have those traits by any means whatsoever. But I'm assuming that you did that, like you went early and you stayed late.
Yeah, I didn't always stay late because people were kind of heading out, but I did stay or get there early, and I really tried to ask questions a lot during the class to like, not a lot of people ask a lot of questions. Um,
Or know what to ask.
yeah, I didn't really know what I was asking, but I'd be like, can you please just say that again in a different way, maybe? Or can you say it one more time? Or like, can you step through it a little slower?
Yeah. I've learned that I didn't learn that in school. I learned that on the job. And because, like, I don't know, my boss would give me a project and he'd say, go off and do this. And I'd be like, wait, I don't know what that is. And then I'd have to like ask them to repeat it multiple times until I got it. It's not acceptable to not know what you're doing like at work versus like in school. I could just, I don't know, screw
I
around.
think I admit all the time I don't know what I'm doing sometimes when pairing with people. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Can you help me, please?
I don't
Or
I don't know what I'm doing ever. Okay, so then what about on the opposite side? Did you see things like mistakes that students were making who weren't successful, assuming that they wanted to continue having a career as an engineer?
yeah, I think I think that a tough thing is like afterwards it's not over, so you just have to study afterwards, and so you know that and just if you're not, it's basically 6 months of you don't really have any weekends or fun time, and
Mhm.
so you could tell myself even the weeks that I did make plans for something fun, it was like a really difficult week. So I think people that were doing a lot of fun stuff probably struggled a lot more. And
Mhm.
it's not 6 months. Like it is 6 months, but it's not 6 months. So I think keeping that in mind.
Yeah,
Otherwise, yeah,
keeping that momentum like after you graduate.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
I agree. Do you think that there were any misconceptions or unrealistic expectations that the boot camp gave you?
Definitely is marketed as like 24 weeks and you can make whatever money thing. And I think if people go into it for just money or the promise of like having this high paying job afterwards, it's not the right reason.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't think, I think I had my own misconceptions. Like I thought that it was going to be a lot easier than it was. It's very difficult. And it is really that you don't have free time. And Um, afterwards, give yourself a little break, but not too long of one because it's really difficult stuff to learn. So I think it's like, how do I hold it in there? How do I absorb it fully? Because you just barely are kind of scratch the surface.
You know what I wish they talked about more in the boot camp was like the different career paths that you could go into more in detail.
Hmm.
I don't really feel like they did that much. And even with QA, I remember having like
Yeah.
one class where they were like, this is mocha chai. And we ran, like, we wrote tests that checked for like an H1 on a, on a web page. And I was like, why would anyone need that? Like, you can see that. And so they didn't really stress the importance of how important QA jobs are. And I
Hmm.
remember sitting in class being like, who would want to do this as a job?
Or even just writing tests for your code in
Or write
general.
tests at all. Like they did, yeah, they didn't make it seem important. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that was one thing for sure.
Yeah. They also started each class with an algorithm, but I never really focused on it because I was trying to like ask questions about my homework with the
Yeah.
tutor and whatnot. And then we did like a tiny bit at the end about algorithms, but I think that's one thing is like just be practicing leak code early on, even if they're just easier ones, just to kind of get the puzzle brain working. Um,
The puzzle brain, yes.
yeah. Well, that's kind of what they are. They try to trick you a little bit. But that's the hardest part about interviews when you get done. So,
Yeah, I don't know if maybe I didn't hear my teacher say that, or maybe he said it like once, but he didn't stress how important they were after the fact. And I was kind of like, because like you said, they would be doing the algorithm problem before the before the class. So I would come in, but I would want to work on my project. So I'm like, well, I can't do both. And
Yeah.
so I looked at the algorithm problems and I was like, well, it's fine. I'll just figure it out later. But it's like you're already so behind if you don't start practicing it like right away. And I wish
Hmm.
they would have been like, you need to pay attention or you're not going to get a job. Like, okay, so fast forward, you are now working as an engineer and you've been lucky enough to sit in on interviews with a variety of different levels. So, what can you tell us about the junior engineering experience?
I think it depends on the companies that you go to. Like the big companies are obviously going to be a little bit more intense, like Amazon's and Facebook's of the world. My first job was like a take home interview, and that was really fun and low stress. Um, but the job really was more WordPress and not really kind of what I wanted to be doing exactly. So I think they kind of correlate, like the difficulty level of like kind of what the job might be like a little bit too. Um,
Mm.
but at Audit Board, there is now 3 technical interviews, but I went through 2 of them. But I was also hired from a front end role, so maybe that's why. The interview that I give the most and I have the most fun with is it's like basically debugging a broken app, and it's a lot of fun. And it's more like pair programming, and I think it's kind of uh, it's a fun interview. I think you are more working together and seeing what that's like because um, although coding is like you're kind of by yourself, and especially in a remote world, it's like still very team driven, and you have to work well with others to be like successful, I think. But it is nerve wracking. I think a lot of practicing before, a lot of leak code. I took a class on Udemy that was really cool about problem solving. And so it breaks down like different patterns that you can use to approach a problem and then like certain steps to I actually think this is great for interviews practice because it's like it's overwhelming, it's scary. So you just like forget certain things or you just go too quickly. So it helps you break down like repeat the question back to yourself and to the interviewer and like rephrase it, make sure you understand it, understand what is the input, what's the output, what are some edge cases. Like you kind of like start thinking about the problem in a different way before you start coding. And then yeah, it showed you a few patterns on like how to approach a problem or anyways, I just thought it was a really good way to prepare for it outside of leak code because I think it was more of like a algorithm interview prep. So it I don't know, it's good. You go in with like a toolkit of like how do I calm myself down and think through the problem rather than being really nervous at the interview and then forgetting everything. Although I still did.
Was it Colt Steel? Because I did a Udemy course by Colt Steel and it was like it sounded just like that and it was great. That's like the best one. I should link that because that's like the best way to learn, I think, on your own. Okay, so in your experience at Autoboard interviewing or like just sitting in on interviews, what are some mistakes that you've seen candidates make?
I think it's just sometimes I think it's just nerves, you know.
Even like
That
senior engineers, you think get nervous too?
yeah, I mean, I think so. Yeah, I think interviews just make people nervous, you know.
Mm,
I think not talking is a big mistake. Like if you talk about it, then they can kind of give you hints or help you along or confirm things, you know. Um, it's kind of like a conversation at the same time. So I think if you're talking your way through it, and even if you don't, also sometimes you're like, is it index of or you know, and then they can be like, oh yeah, it is. It's like they don't expect you to. I mean, everybody Googles JavaScript methods on their you
yeah,
know in their day job, so they don't expect you to remember everything. Or is it you know they kind of includes or you know whatever. It's like sometimes. So if you talk out loud, they can kind of help you along. I think is a good thing.
yeah,
So the people I feel like kind of struggle the most are the quietly struggling ones where you're like kind of trying to coax them into talking about what their thought process is. But And I think that's a lot
Yeah.
of the interview too, especially for junior people. It's more like, how are you thinking about things? Because we know that you have a lot to learn. We don't expect you to be like ultimate solution, blowing our minds, you know? So,
Hmm. Yeah. How do you get them to then, especially if they're juniors, then like what's the way to make them feel more comfortable? Are you kind of like, do you just ask them like, what are you thinking here?
certain questions, I'll be like, I'll show you an example that already exists in the code of like how data flows or whatever. And then does that make sense? And then kind of give them the next task or whatever. Like I pause to kind of give examples of what you might be doing in the next part, you know?
Well, you're like a
Uh,
nice interviewer. Is that a tactic that you took from someone else, or did you come up with that on your own?
yeah, I think so. Because most people, like, maybe they're not junior, they're more, either way, junior or senior, maybe they don't really know Ember. So the interview is not about knowing Ember. It's like,
How quickly
you
can
know,
you pick things
it's
up?
a debugging thing. Can you pick up data flow? Can you debug things? Can basic JavaScript stuff? It's just a front end React or like front end JavaScript, so it's not,
Hmm.
we're not expecting, the Ember syntax perfectly. So I'll show you what that is. It's like, do you pick up quickly?
Hmm. Well, then they
So
can also see like the people that they're working with, and because like you're interviewing them, but they're
100%.
also kind of interviewing you to see if they want to work at this company, and if you're like if that's how you pair, and they can see that, then they're going to want to work with you.
Yeah. Well, and I always started off like, this is kind of more of like a pair programming interview. It's, you know,
Hmm.
we'll debug things together. Maybe I'm not supposed to do that, but I think it's fine.
Now everybody knows.
Nobody's trying to trick you into like failing. They're not like, how can we really confuse this person? They want you to do good.
And I don't think you would want to work at a company that's trying to trick you anyways. Like
No,
that's
no.
mean. That's like
Yeah.
unnecessarily rude. so
Yeah.
so if you had one role and you had like two or three candidates going for it and they were both technically proficient, are there other things that would make a candidate stand out? Or like how would you choose between them? I
I
think
think people want people that it's more of like, would you want to work with this person on your team? You know what I mean?
I say is a lot of it personality too.
It's personality, but I think it's technical. It's both. Some people are really technically smart and they don't interview well because it's a little awkward, and that's okay. It's not
Mhm.
just personality, but I think it's both. But if somebody's like, I don't know, overly cocky too in an interview, that's not
You
the
can kind
best.
of pick that up.
Yeah. And then you're like, I don't know if do you have a
Mm.
big ego, or are you just feeling like, powerful for your interview? That's good. I don't know. It's like, obviously it's not like it's a feeling based thing. You are being like, these are the tasks. They did the tasks or they didn't do the tasks, and they were really communicative, and they talked about empathy for their coworkers and wanting to leave notes for their code or something. That's good. It's like,
Mhm.
that's great. Like I would leave a note here for whatever, or I don't know. It's like, yeah, it's more like, how do they work together? And I don't know. Do they like mentoring people, or are they looking for mentorship, or I don't know. I
Mhm.
don't like it when people are like, so unlimited PTO, does that mean? And then you're like, what? It's such a weird question. It's like,
Wait, someone said that to you in an interview?
I've had like more than one person ask about like the
Yeah.
time off. I like the questions that are like, what's work life balance like? Because I do think some people have probably a little PTSD of like not great work life balance. So I appreciate that question. But when it's like too much about like unlimited PTO is like, it's unlimited, but also if you were to try to take off like 8 weeks a year, probably not.
It's not really unlimited. It's a trick.
It's a trick. Yeah.
Not a question you ask before you even get the job.
No.
Let's go back to like when you first started working at Autoboard. What were the biggest challenges for you and how did you overcome them?
Um, Working remote was a little hard because it's hard to figure out like how you get help on well, it was a little hard for me because most of my team it was all back end, and I was doing front end work, so it was a huge code base. It was really hard to find anything in the code, and um, I think people showed me like extensions to use for Ember that helped a lot. Or yeah, I think once you find a couple people on other teams, like you kind of have to reach out, see who is willing to help you. If you don't have help on your team, that was kind of an unfortunate situation, but it didn't last very long. Yeah, I think just being a little afraid to ask for questions early. So spending a lot of time kind of struggling when you can just reach out. People are happy to help you and they know way faster, you know? So,
Mhm. Yeah.
um,
Whatever, like, I remember in class, they were like, if it takes you more than 20 minutes to figure something out, just ask us. That goes the same for like work too. It's like, try to figure it out on your own first, but like at some point, ask someone who knows, you know?
yeah, or like just really dig in and try to figure it out yourself. So then when you go to ask for help, you are like, I think it's around here someplace, you know, in
Hmm.
this bit of code or whatever. And then have, I don't know, when you do ask for help, if it is like something tricky, like reproduce it a lot of times so you know how to be able to show them exactly what you're needing help with when
Hmm.
somebody is able to help. But yeah, I think just not being afraid to ask for help is like the biggest thing. And at Audit Board, we do a lot in Slack. And so even in public channels, asking for help. And then you get to meet people that are willing to help you that you can reach out to directly afterwards.
Even I'm afraid to ask questions sometimes, though, in public channels because I'm like, they're going to think I'm an idiot. Or at some point, it's like, should I know this already? I guess, like, what would your advice be to someone who, I don't know, I feel like I'm an extrovert and you definitely are too. So what about people who are coming in that like are not, it's like not easy for them to reach out to people?
I think you just kind of have to
You just do
kind of
it.
put yourself out there, and people aren't going to think that you're dumb. They're not going to be like, oh, this idiot. You know, they're just going to be like, oh, I've I've ran into that before myself, so here you go. Or you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Nobody, I don't know, especially being junior, even not being junior, you know, you don't be afraid to ask questions, you know.
Yeah. A lot of times I start with like, this may be a dumb question.
I think that's self-deprecating and it doesn't need to be there either, you know.
No, do I need to stop saying that?
Yeah, you can just be like, "Hey, I don't know if this is, you know, I don't know," or just using a good emoji or something like "the more you know" or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess it took me a while to realize that like people aren't bothered when you ask them a question. I think that was my thing is like, I don't want to ask too many questions because they're going to be so annoyed with me. But I honestly feel like the best people, like when we have great people on our team, I feel like they love it. Like they love helping and they love teaching because they love what they do.
People generally like to help anyways. Like it's just like kind of human nature.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so then my final question is, what advice would you give an engineer to stand out in their first year?
Mm, I mean, I think just like always asking questions and like not being afraid to do tough things and dig into code. And when you're doing code review, don't be afraid to even just like send out a message to that person and being like, hey, can, even if it's a question about the code, why did you do this way, you know? And you know, like Ember syntax stuff is a little bit interesting to learn because it's a little different. So all of a sudden you're like, is that a JavaScript thing or an Ember thing? Or like, what is this, you know? And I'll
Hmm.
ask a question and then they'll be like, oh, let me find the documentation on it really quick and like send it over and be like, basically, here's this or what. It's, I think asking lots of questions, doing code reviews are a really good way to like learn.
Hmm.
Not being afraid to ask questions there. Um,
If you
yeah,
do
just
code reviews, like you get to see how other people are coding, and I feel like I've learned a lot sometimes too, just by seeing like the way that their thought process goes. So I agree with
yeah,
that one for sure.
yeah,
I feel like some of the ways that I stood out in the very beginning were, and these were like natural things for me because I feel like I'm a pretty organized person, and I kind of came in and I started documenting things.
oh
Like,
yeah, people love documentation. Oh my god.
yeah, there wasn't any documentation. And so I remember just like when I learned something, I would document it. And I love like making my documents look really nice and organized with their headlines and stuff. And yeah, and sending it out because I knew other people would have these questions later. So
Yeah.
documentations are like, I don't know, I wasn't an expert by any means to like go in and start improving processes, but there were little things that I could improve in like the way that things were being done and just be like, hey, I feel like, I don't know, with my experience, I'm like, I've seen it worked better this way. Maybe we could try that. And like just suggesting things, you know,
Yeah.
not being
Yeah.
not being a little fly on the wall, just trying to make things easier and better.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're doing like product work like I do, it's like um I think thinking about things from the customer's perspective is huge. And then that way when you are in meetings, like whether they're design meetings or engineering meetings, whatnot, you are able to ask questions that I think if you're thinking about how the customer is going to use it, they're good questions to ask,
Mm-hmm.
to be a part of the conversation. And I think not being afraid to be a part of the conversation is a good way to stand out too. I know at the beginning I was really afraid of discussing things or asking questions, and um, like in meetings, I was pretty quiet at the beginning, and then because I'm just trying to learn, I don't really have any real opinions, and
Mm-hmm.
not that I have strong opinions really, but I do think about stuff from the customer's perspective. So in certain meetings, I do ask a lot of questions, but it's like, but I'm confused by this and I'm the one trying to build it. So how will anybody know how to use this right or whatever? So
Yeah. Well, because you're a customer too. And I mean, not for Auditboard, but like for other products.
yeah,
And so like, you know how a customer thinks and you know what good design is and UI, UX. So you're like, wait, why? Yeah, I think it is. That makes you stand out for sure. Like, not just being the engineer who gets like the designs and does it. It's like questioning things like, wait, is this the right way to do it?
when you are getting your first feature work, like reaching out to somebody that's more higher level than you and being like, how would you do this? And like asking questions on what are the best practices. I want to know, I want to learn, asking certain people to review your PR just because somebody reviews it. If they're not like, if it is a front end ticket and they're not really front end, maybe you want somebody front end that's going to kind of fine tooth comb it a little differently.
Mhm. You know who those people are in the company that you just are going to make you better. And those are all my questions.
Yay.
Thank you for letting me pick your brain today.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
It's been fun.
Yeah, we'll do it again one day.
We'll do it again. Yes.